Welcome to Broadband Action. It's a podcast presented by the Community Broadband Action Network. I'm Curtis Dean. As you likely know, we here at CBAN are big supporters of community-owned broadband networks, as well as private providers, as long as they have a strong community focus. So we were really excited to read a recent report by our friends at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which outlined just how much the municipal broadband community has grown in recent years, and just how far we've gone since the early days of maverick municipal networks like Glasgow, Kentucky, which was the first publicly owned network to offer internet service way back in 1989. Our guests today were both involved in putting together the Institute for Local Self-Reliance's great report. We'd like to welcome to the show and back to Broadband Action, Sean Gonsalves and Rai Marcatillio. Thank you, boys, for both coming on today.
Hey, Curtis.
All right, thanks for having
Appreciate that. We are really excited to talk about this report, which I was excited to read because it's kind of fun to see your thoughts and your opinions put into statistics. In other words, what I felt was happening in the industry wasn't just a myth; it actually is happening. So, Rai, I just want to start with you. Have you give us a brief overview of the report on the growth of municipal broadband?
Sure. So at ILSR, we track community networks of all shapes and sizes, from cities to electric and telephone cooperatives to tribal networks, nonprofit models. And we recently finished building a brand new database that should give us some new tools to do this a little bit better. And the report that you're talking about is kind of the very first product of that. A census of municipal networks seemed like a natural place to start, since that's always been the core of what we do. So 2021 was a little bit of a slow year, but in the last 2 years, we've seen the establishment of more than 36 new municipal networks across the United States. Everything from institutional networks for smart city applications or government services, to open access, dark fiber, fiber to the home networks, data center activity, and middle mile. We're tracking, new cities, as well as public utility districts and communications union districts in Vermont. And so we saw more than a dozen new cities starting their own retail fiber to the home service, 6 doing public-private partnerships, 4 doing public-public partnerships. A couple of new PUDs came online in Washington, and then about a dozen new open access networks, which is really exciting.
Great. So, Sean, I'd like to turn to you for just a second. What's motivated ILSR to conduct this great research? It's really kind of part of your core mission and reason for being, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's in line with some of the other initiatives at ILSR, but I mean, really, I think the motivating thing around the history of the Community Broadband Networks initiative is that it was a recognition that communities really don't, have few options to really ensure that everyone has access to what they need. And so municipal networks are a model, I think, also for that give communities the opportunity for self-determination. And so that was sort of really the impetus. And then, of course, the program Community Broadband Networks Initiative is about 16 years old, and it really began in some of the early stuff that the program looked at were a lot of these fights over preemption. And so in terms of limiting what communities could do in this space. And so that's sort of the seeds out of which this program was birthed.
So we're kind of talking about the past, present, and the future of municipal broadband here today on our podcast. And so I want to talk a little bit about the recent past, because, Rai, you've really shown in your findings, as you kind of summarized, this growth seems to have accelerated in the past few years. What are some of the trends that are making that happen? Is it all COVID, or does it go beyond just COVID was bad and we all needed better broadband?
I think certainly COVID played a role. To some extent, cities, these projects take time to get off the ground. Cities, they want to gauge the local markets and survey the people and see what their concerns are, whether they're reliability concerns or cost or speed, or if there are pockets of the community left behind. And so cities often take time to do that kind of foundational work. And so to say it's all COVID, I think wouldn't be the case. But 2022 and 2023 were big years. They were the two biggest years we've ever seen for the establishment of new municipal networks. But they were also the two biggest consecutive years in a row, beating out 2015 and 2016, which were our previous highs. But so the last 2 years have individually seen 3 times as many new municipal networks established as any given year in the aughts, and twice as many as most of the years in the 2010s. So we're excited to keep a close eye on 2024 and see how this trend continues.
You know, we've been fortunate. Some of these more recent operators, municipal operators, we've had a few here where I live in Iowa, but it's really not. It's there's pockets everywhere. We still see some of those restrictions, obviously, that are kind of keeping it from going even further beyond that. But Sean, what are these? What are some of the factors, local factors, that you see when you talk to these communities that are building broadband?
The kind of the driving factors.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. What's
so
motivating?
yeah, and I mean, of course, you know, there's multiple factors, but I think at the heart of it is a desire for choice, and affordability, reliability, and you know, you look at surveys. There's a reason why some of the big incumbents are on these lists of companies that people or most hated companies or what have you. And so, but I think most of that isn't born out of like a sense of like people are these are bad companies or bad people, but it's that fundamental I think desire that I think is increasingly the case, is that people are aware that they're paying a premium for a service that sometimes they feel is inadequate, and if there's something better, they're interested. And then that's also combined with how society has developed. And so I think for communities, it becomes more, it's dawning on people how important that access is, and not just for those who can afford it, but for an entire community. So I think those are some of the factors. And then, of course, in certain cities, I would just add this, is that in certain communities, it's an economic development thing, where you're, having a difficult time if you're city officials in attracting new business, or hearing from local businesses that they are thinking about relocating because the telecommunication infrastructure isn't adequate in that community. These are some of the things that I think really motivate community, local communities to start thinking, okay, we've got to really make sure we've got ubiquitous access.
And we're going to talk about the role of digital equity in this growth, because it has moved farther up the top when it comes to motivations for municipal broadband. And it's beyond just more reliable service and faster service, but that universality. And we'll talk about that here in just a few minutes. Rye, you mentioned that you've had a combination of approaches in these past few years with these new networks. It seems to me that there's been a shift from it always being a city-owned and operated network like it was in the 90s and 2000s to more creative approaches. So maybe talk about, is there a shift going on right now to public-private networks and maybe even open access networks?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. Certainly, we're seeing slightly higher numbers of public-private partnerships these days than we did 5 or 10 years ago. But I don't think overwhelmingly so. There are also a goodly number, I mentioned, public-public partnerships out there that are getting off the ground, whether it's Massachusetts cities partnering with Westfield's Whip City Fiber, or cities working with electric or telephone cooperatives, or a nearby, established, mature municipal network. As for open access, I think we are seeing more open access networks in recent years, which, as I said, is exciting. The 2 new public utility districts that came online in Washington State. Of course, there's a long history there of the PUDs being open access and covering far and wide. Superior, Wisconsin, Bozeman, Montana, of course. But the lion's share the proportion of networks that are city run and built and operated, serving homes and businesses, those still make up the majority of what we see.
Right.
Yeah.
It seems that open access model had to prove itself.
Yeah.
In the marketplace and on the financial sheets, right? And now it finally has really gotten to the point where it is a true option for communities.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, open access networks are so interesting, and I think one of the appeals is that I feel like with open access network, it sort of separates the infrastructure from the service, and so it really gets to the heart of what I think. It sort of it creates the infrastructure that creates the conditions for there to be competition and for there to be multiple providers when it's done well. And it's not an easy needle to thread, but I think the appeal of open access networks is from a community perspective or from a municipal perspective is it's like, you know what, we'll focus on building infrastructure, which is what we do as cities. We build roads, we build schools, we can build this network and then you've got you've created the atmosphere or the conditions for there to be choices and options for folks.
We'll build the road, you bring the UPS trucks to bring my Amazon stuff to me. That's kind of the way that approach is. And we definitely are going to take a deep dive on open access at some time this year and here on Broadband Action, because it is a fascinating topic and something that I think it's time may really have come from a wider expanse of municipal broadband operators. We still, even though we've had successes and we continue to have successes here in the past few years, there's still some real challenges out there for municipal broadband networks. So Sean, maybe talk about some of the challenges that municipals face when they are establishing and operating their own citywide network.
Oh man, well, first of all,
have we got all day?
Yeah, it's like, well, first of all, if this stuff was easy, it would have already been done. So this isn't easy. But I would say, broadly speaking, the biggest challenges are, the first big challenge is, all right, first of all, where are we going to get the funds? How are we going to finance this? I think that is the primary, challenge. But there's also a lot to be said for the public education component. So that folks, have a sense of what the digital landscape looks like and the technologies that are available and kind of how the dynamics work and how these things work. And so that's a big part of it, because you obviously, need not only local champions, as we like to say, people who are, are willing to kind of like roll up their sleeves and dig in and plan this out over an extended period of time. I mean, we're talking about projects that, from conception to, fiber to the home service, let's just say, could be decades, or it could be 5 years, or it could be several years. But the point is that there's financing challenges, there's public education challenges, there's, there's political considerations. And also there's the challenge of putting together a really solid business plan. I think, communities obviously can run into trouble if you've got some kind of scenario where you don't truly understand the market, the local market. So it's super important to have a very strong business case, and you need, I think, buy-in. Not only do you need a core group of people who are willing to see this through, but you need to be, get some significant buy-in from, the elected officials in a community.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be a lot of due diligence.
And then we didn't even talk about, like, there's challenges, of course, a lot, even after you get past that point. There's challenges around,
eyes wide open going in, and ability to pivot, I think, is one thing we've always talked about with communities that we've worked with over the years. Go in with your eyes wide open, be prepared to pivot, have a great plan, and then know that plan will never actually fulfill itself exactly the way you thought it was. So be ready to react, and getting that good advice and best practices up front is huge. And so those are all the sorts of things that they're challenges that can be overcome, obviously. Now, one of the other challenges that we are seeing, and we've always seen, but it seems like it's kind of been coming back again to haunt us, it's the reawakening of the big telecom dark money zombies that are trying to make municipal broadband operators not do as well as they should. So, Sean, we've seen a lot of that lately. Talk about some of the strong efforts that have been out there by those dark money groups pushing back and trying to keep big telecom in their monopolistic environment.
Yeah. What's interesting is that historically, these type of campaigns were really mostly directed towards elected officials, policymakers. And so what's sort of newish about this wave, and this is something that Doug Dawson made me realize, is that these are campaigns that are actually specifically targeted to the general public. And so we've seen campaigns in Bountiful, Utah. I'm based in Massachusetts. There's one in the town next to me in the town of Falmouth that is considering a fiber to the home proposal there. Maine, there's been quite a few efforts over the years. And so you see these different groups, and they always have these names, Alliance for Quality Broadband, Mass Priorities, Gather Utah. And essentially they're these AstroTurf campaigns, and to find the source of these money, sort of the smoking gun of who funds these is hard to do, but it has the fingerprints of previous campaigns that are led by incumbents, where you get into the Machiavellian politics of it. They want to crush any kind of competition in its infancy. And so wherever there's a serious effort underway for a community to do this, they should probably expect there to be some blowback.
Mm-hmm. These, I'm always amazed, these dark money groups are as creative in coming up with names as pharmaceutical companies are coming up with names for new drugs to make them sound so cool, and everybody wants them then. But you're exactly right. I think that, and there's been a lot of, for example, one of our CBAN members is Frankfort, Kentucky, and they're facing an attack right now by a lawmaker who is trying to pass a law that would basically single out Frankfort and remove the authority for them to continue operating. And, Frankfort and other groups like ILSR, like Fiber Broadband Association, American Association for Public Broadband, CBAN, we've all been trying to help push that back, to help people pull that veil back and let people in that community know that this is not somebody acting. There's no public interest anyone's trying to serve here. This is totally trying to serve a private interest. So, right, do you see that this trend is going to continue? And if you do, what do we do as the community that are promoting municipal and public broadband? What do we do to keep pushing back?
Yeah, so I mean, the existence of these ads that we're doing something right. By and large, compared to the monopoly providers, municipal networks offer faster service, lower prices, way better customer service, because the incentive there isn't to extract wealth for shareholders, but instead provide a necessary service to neighbors and fellow residents. And so keep doing what you're doing. It's important to remember that these campaigns pop up because the monopoly ISPs, they don't like to compete, and they're not all that good at it. So when a new provider comes to town and offers a valuable service to folks at a price that they can afford, that threatens their bottom line. And so people just need to, when these AstroTurf campaigns pop up, keep talking, sharing information, helping each other out, and be ready to counter the misinformation that they spread.
A quote that I've used in the past in relation to these anti-muni efforts is, it's actually a quote from Abraham Lincoln, of all people, and who can question his authority. And it's, what kills the skunk is the publicity he gives himself, or something like that. I might have messed that up, but that's true. They don't have a real story to tell. They don't have a positive story to tell. So all they can do is attack. And so, unfortunately, like so much of American life, that has become how we influence people, not in the positive manner, but in the negative manner. I want to circle back and talk a little bit about digital equity, digital inclusion, because that's a key part of our mission here at CBAN. Either one of you can tackle this. How do you see municipal broadband initiatives helping address those issues of digital equity and digital inclusion in communities?
Sean, you want me to start?
Yeah, why don't you? I've got a few thoughts about it, but it's
Sure.
it's a great question. Go ahead, Go ahead, Brian.
So I mean, so we see a range of approaches to tackle digital equity and inclusion issues. Some of them are inherent in the local model. For instance, most of the cities that we track and write about and cover commit to building their networks citywide. That means there are no pockets left of unconnected households because some market research argued that there was less of a profit to be made there, or because there was a little more challenging topography or logistics or something like that. Second, we see plenty of cities, even prior to and independent of the Affordable Connectivity Program, offering a low-cost option to help households who are struggling financially. For instance, Fort Collins, Colorado has a symmetrical gigabit option for households who qualify at $20 a month. There are other cities like Wilson, North Carolina, who have implemented some innovative bill pay tools to help residents who might be going through economic hardship. So, for instance, households can connect to the network there for very small chunks of time. Maybe there's a doctor's appointment coming up, or there's a student in the home that has a project coming up at the end of the semester. Instead of signing a 2-year contract that you're locked into, families can connect for a day or a few days or a week, and then turn off that service without taking the hit that they otherwise might. And then the last example I'll mention, because I think it's pretty inspiring, when Hillsboro, Oregon started building their network a couple of years ago, they explicitly started their build in one of the areas of the city where the annual median income was among the lowest in their region. And so they made it an explicit part of their plan right from the outset.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Sean?
It is. I mean, those are fantastic examples. And I think what they all point to is that, and this is another thing that makes this approach appealing to communities, is that it puts you in a position to be able to make those decisions locally and to have those approaches of, let's build first in this particular part of town for this reason. Let's, we're not in this business, so to speak, to make money for shareholders. How can we invest this in our community and provide affordability and make that a primary a concern apart from ACP? So these are that kind of influence and decision making and self-determination is why I think at the heart of these things that municipal broadband and other forms of community broadband networks are such an appealing idea.
I loved some of the creative ways that communities have used their networks to promote digital inclusion, like what you mentioned, Raya. I had not heard about the limited time access for people who can't afford it more. I know that the fighting back against digital redlining was one of the key reasons why Waterloo Mayor Quentin Hart really was advocating for the city to build a fiber network, because they did have another company coming in to build fiber, but they would not commit to building to those areas that maybe were a little more economically distressed. And he said, we just can't do that in this age. So we gotta have to do this ourselves.
And just talking about this, I'm just thinking about how, frankly, a lot of the communities that we cover, we're looking at the network, the infrastructure, et cetera, the services, the impact on the community. But just in terms of like take rate, that is a concern in any, build. And so you see that, digital equity, what is sort of considered digital equity things that, address other barriers to adoption, getting online. It would behoove municipal networks to really think, deeply about, how to even, further expand in that area, just out of, pure sort of, sustainthis financially, just thinking about, take rates and things of that nature, that there's other, this isn't an infrastructure like water or electricity, where if you build it, people are, where you've got this audience where, where like everybody's going to get it for sure. So that's an important component, I think.
I'm always heartened to see there's some communities out there, and not to keep name dropping, but I do. One of our CBAN members is Selco in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. And when I first met with them after they joined CBAN, I noticed they weren't in the ACP. And they said, well, we've been doing a low-income plan for years. We just build it into our rate base and we budget for it. And so when ACP sunsets, which is there's another podcast. When ACP dies here later this year, probably, then their customers will never felt the impact because they never used ACP. They didn't have to. So some of those private, in-house ACP type programs, I think, could go a long way toward fulfilling the affordability gap. And who better to do it than a municipal broadband network whose mission is to serve the community, not to serve an investor. So I'll get off my soapbox now. We're going to wrap this thing up here in just a minute. So I'll just have both you weigh in on the last couple of questions. What do you think? What is ILSR's perspective on the future of municipal broadband networks in America?
Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, thank you, Rye. I think
he just wanted more time to think of his answer.
Right. That's a great. I mean, I think generally, it's pretty. I don't want to say the word rosy doesn't seem right, but I think exciting. I think that we'll expect to see, dozens of other communities come online. So when we released our numbers of what was right around 50 new networks, I'm sure that, those numbers will continue to increase. At what pace, I don't know. But, for example, there's potentially 40 new municipal networks that will be built in California and over the next few years. So I think that we are going to see this number climb significantly over the next, say 3 to 5 years.
And Rye, any closing thoughts from you on that topic?
I would add to that. I think we're optimistic, but we're practical researchers, and so the reason we write about municipal networks is they contribute to this project that Sean's mentioned a couple times of self-determination and local self-reliance. They keep local economies stronger. They keep money in our cities and our towns. They help combat corporate concentration. They make communities more resilient, and so their establishment is an expression, and often a long simmering one, of frustration with bad and expensive service that the monopoly providers have gotten away with for providing for so long.
Well, that's exactly why this whole trend started in the first place. We want we want better service, and if nobody else is going to do it, we got to do it for ourselves. So talk about the mission of self-reliance. It's right up your guys' alley. So it's only natural that your organization has been such a key advocate and leader and researcher in this field. So thank you for doing all that great work, and thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Curtis.
Terrific. Thanks.
You bet. Our guests today here on Broadband Action have been Sean Gonsalves and Ryan Marcatillio, both with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. We'll see you all guys back next time here on Broadband Action.